Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee Lines has the night off. We begin with breaking news. Anthropic blacklisted. President Trump moments ago pulling the plug on the government's use of Anthropic AI technology as we are now crossing tonight's 5 p.m. deadline for a deal. At issue, the Department of Defense demand that Anthropic allow full use of its AI technology without guardrails, something Anthropic has refused to do, even at the risk of losing its military contract valued at some $200 million. President Trump posting on Truth Social just moments ago, directing federal agencies to immediately cease all use of Anthropic's technology, writing, quote, there will be a 6-month phase-out period for agencies like the Department of War who are using Anthropic's products at various levels. Anthropic better get their act together, he writes, and be helpful during this phase-out period, or I will use the full power of the presidency to make them comply, unquote. We've got our reporters covering this and a lot more for you tonight. Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, Becca are in Washington, Julie Fine in Texas, where the president currently is, and Nora Melinda covering markets for us here in New York. We begin with Mike Shepard. We saw it coming, Mike, and here we are. It's 5:01 p.m. Is this over?
Nothing is really over until Donald Trump says it is. And on one level, he really closed the door. He said that Anthropic, it's time for you to go. You have 6 months to leave town. You're off the federal government payroll. You are out of the federal government's networks. And yet we have seen Trump reverse course on a number of other things in the past. And if Anthropic is in some way willing to capitulate to meet the Pentagon's demands or satisfy whatever additional concerns that Trump may be raising on his own, this is the first time we have heard him weigh in on this dispute, Joe. We could see perhaps yet another reversal. But right now, it's a pretty final word from the president, at least at this moment.
What does this mean for the other AI companies? Shep, they've been talking to Google about Gemini. I believe they've already cleared Grok from XAI for classified use. What comes next?
Well, Joe, that really is a great question, because all of these AI companies are not only looking for all that commercial and civilian business out there across a number of industries, they are also looking at the main industry here in Washington, and that is the U.S. government, which has always been a lucrative source of business and income and contracts for a number of other industries. So this is a message to them as well, that they need to get aboard. For Elon Musk and XAI, it may be a little bit easier row to hoe in that case. But if you are OpenAI, it could be a little bit tougher. We heard Sam Altman in a memo yesterday to his employees that Bloomberg has seen. He said that, look, we are interested in exploring classified work with the Pentagon, but we would like to for the government to abide by some of the same restrictions that Anthropic has been fighting for. So we will want to see how those kinds of negotiations pan out. And OpenAI, for now, unlike XAI and Anthropic, has not been cleared for classified work on Pentagon.
I see. The president is using some pretty colorful language, as typically seen in a post like this. Mike, the left-wing nut jobs at Anthropic, he says, have made a disastrous mistake trying to strong-arm the Department of War. I don't know if that's an accurate depiction of the company's posture here, but if they, in fact, are labeled a supply chain risk and they lose this contract worth $200 million, does Anthropic still have a business?
Well, they would still have a business on the commercial side. When you compare the size of that contract with their overall commercial revenue run rate, it's vast. We're talking about $14 billion in commercial revenue for the company. So it's really just a fraction of that. And yet there is the reputational question and what it might, the spillover or the blast radius might be with other partners that also have federal work. So far, the Pentagon has not declared the company a supply chain risk. So far, it really does spell out as just no more federal contracts for you. You're out of the system. But we're not getting that broader warning that other companies are forbidden from doing business with Anthropic if they also have federal work.
You've been great on this story, and we thank you for the help this week, Shep. Bloomberg's Michael Shepard live in Washington. As we now consider the implications of President Trump's Anthropic announcement, joining us, Becca, defense lead at Bloomberg Economics. Becca, I always like to remind people that you used to run war games at the Department of Defense before you came to us here at Bloomberg. Can you give us a sense, if not for autonomous weapons, what exactly the DoD is using Anthropic technology for?
Well, the Department of Defense is using AI for a whole bunch of things. And some of these are really, really boring things like aggregating spreadsheets and figuring out how you would get your military logistics from, say, Europe or the Caribbean to the Middle East, like we're seeing right now. But some of it is also a little bit more on the pointy end. We see various AI technologies being put to use in things like targeting tools, where warfighters are able to use them to figure out where they need to go for potential targets, who's in play and who might not be. And that's been a bone of contention about how much AI should be involved and how autonomous some of the decision-making should be. We're also seeing AI being incorporated into a lot of hardware. Drones, which we've seen be used to great use on the battlefield in Ukraine, are one example where you do need some of these AI technologies to be able to harness them and use them in a way that fits with the Pentagon's vision of future warfare.
Well, that's all really fascinating. I guess I'm trying to figure out if Anthropic is correct to worry about this. The Department of Defense has said that they have no intention of using AI for mass surveillance or for human-free weapons, the two conditions that Anthropic has. But, Becca, this is moving so fast. If the Pentagon actually owns the keys to this AI technology, is that where this is heading?
I mean, the AI race is moving so quickly. Already, we are seeing China jump ahead when it comes down to the usage of military AI. And they have a lot less rules than the United States does when it comes to considering where you want a human to be involved in some of these targeting decisions, in some of the usage of these autonomous weapons. And this comes down to questions of ethics and whether you want to have a human on the loop or in the loop. And ultimately, it comes down to the fact that the Department of Defense right now is considering things for the present. It's not necessarily thinking about how these technologies could evolve, the various use cases that they could be used for, and the ways in which that might play out a bit differently in the future. So you're right to say that it moves pretty quickly, but I think it's both the technology and the use cases that matter here.
Becca, I want to get into Iran with you. The president's being briefed on options, and we understand that we're moving embassy personnel potentially out of harm's way. Does this give you a sense that we could see strikes this weekend? What questions are you asking?
I think there's a lot of signals that are happening right now, and I think there's also a lot of last-minute shuttle diplomacy. But still, the gaps are so wide that it would have to be a massive breakthrough in order to bring the United States back from the brink of what looks like to be some type of limited strikes at the very least. But there's a lot of concerns about how these strikes could play out, what they would be up against. Would that actually result in some type of tit-for-tat retaliation that mires the United States in a much longer war than it envisions, as you look at how President Trump has campaigned on the idea of no more forever wars, and that he is able to do these short burst military actions and nothing else other than that? We might not see that play out here, particularly when you look at the fact that Iran has sizable capabilities, including missiles, that they can use to hold U.S. air bases and ships at risk, and the potential for limited munitions depth on the United States side. There might not be enough missiles for a potential long war.
Wow. You know, I spoke earlier today with Colonel Sanders at Bloomberg Intelligence, who did some back-of-napkin math to suggest and to find that the two carrier strike groups we have in theater right now, the combination of salaries for sailors and the cost of gas before firing a shot is coming in close to $30 million a day, Becca. How long can we keep that posture?
Well, I think it's less of a question of dollars and more a question of people.
Okay.
It's a question of how long can people actually be out there and not seeing their families and not, necessarily seeing any action, but not really having a very clear objective for what it is that they're doing. You've mentioned the financial costs, but it's these long-term readiness costs, the morale, what it means for the wear and tear on U.S. capabilities and various systems. But it's also questions of how long can they be out there without using so much of these resources. It's the same thing. If there were to be a potential conflict between the United States and Iran, there are questions about what what resources we should use, how long we should use them for, and whether they should be husbanded for other potential priorities as well.
I want everyone, Becca, to hear the latest from the president on this. He was asked on his way out of town. He's in Texas right now. He was asked in the driveway about his plans for Iran. Here's what he said.
Well, we haven't made a final decision. We're not exactly happy with the way they're negotiating. They cannot have nuclear weapons, and we're not thrilled with the way they're negotiating. So we'll see how it all works. It'd be wonderful if they negotiate really in good conscience, good faith and conscience. But they are not getting there. We have the greatest military anywhere in the world. There's nothing close. I'd love not to use it, but sometimes you have to.
He jumped on the helicopter and went to Andrews from there. Becca, when you hear the president suggest that the Iranians are not negotiating in good faith, what do you think?
I think that means that what happened the other day in Geneva did not produce the results that President Trump wanted. He's been trying to use this military hammer to bring the Iranians to heel, to force concessions out of them. But as I said before, I think the gap is too wide between what Iran is willing to concede and what Trump wants. And so I think he's quite disappointed. But ultimately, that speaks to the fact that perhaps his attempt at trying to do this military pressure campaign is not netting the result. And therefore, we might see him actually move more toward military action in the coming days, hours, or whatever it is that he decides.
You've been great on this, Becca, as well. Thank you so much for your help this week. Becca Wasser, defense lead for Bloomberg Economics, giving us a sense of what we should be watching for this weekend. To Texas now, where the president, again, is paying a visit just days before a state primary there. Could help decide control of Congress in November. The president Corpus Christi to promote his energy and economic policies, as you can see on Bloomberg TV. But it's the Republican Senate primary on Tuesday that is looming large. Joining us now with details of President Trump's visit to Texas and what it might mean for voting on Tuesday, Bloomberg Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine. Hey, Julie, it's great to see you. The president obviously has a stump speech, a sort of rally-style speech. But the problem here is we have three candidates, three Republicans. He hasn't endorsed any of them, including the incumbent, John Cornyn. How awkward is this going to be?
Well, I can't even imagine the flight on the way there where John Cornyn was actually on Air Force One with him. So let's discuss that. I mean, obviously, it appears he is not going to endorse today. It seems like if he had endorsed and really wanted to avoid a runoff in this election, he would have done so earlier. But it is very awkward. All three of them are there. You have different Republicans in the state backing their candidates, some sitting out of it. The governor has not endorsed anyone. But the fact that the president is here 5 days before this all-important primary election that could eventually affect the balance of power in the Senate and not endorsing anyone speaks volumes.
Well, isn't that the truth? Maybe that'll change if there is a runoff, but I'd like you to talk about the likelihood of that happening, Julie. Isn't that how this ends?
I'll tell you what was very interesting. Senator Cornyn's campaign actually sent out an email today giving the date of the election and the date of a likely primary runoff when they were talking about events this coming weekend. So obviously these candidates are thinking about a runoff in this election. On the Democratic side, obviously a different story, but the Republicans are certainly thinking about that. It is likely ahead, which drags this on. The question is, does President Trump get involved in that likely runoff? You
mentioned the Democrats, Jasmine Crockett, James Talarico. The numbers have been so noisy, Julie. How do you watch this as the bureau chief in Texas without a poll you can hold on to?
It is very challenging to watch this in that respect because the polls have been all over the place. We saw one recently that has Jasmine Crockett ahead. However, this is before the James Talarico incident on Stephen Colbert, and he's gotten so much attention since then. One thing that's also interesting for us to note as we watch this primary night, the election is actually in two different time zones. You have all of the state plus El Paso in the mountain time zone. So you really have to wait for those results to come in as well. Obviously, you have to look at those large cities, but all of this can change when we see the rural areas come in. We saw that happen with Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke was ahead most of the evening when the larger cities came in, but then the rural districts came in. So that's something that we will really be paying attention to in the next few days.
Good to see you, Julie. Bloomberg Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine with us on Balance of Power. And we turn to Wall Street, where we close out the last trading day of the month with losses. Let's get highlights in power moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who's with me here at World Headquarters in New York. Great to see you, Nora. A losing day, a losing month. That wasn't very fun for tech investors, was it?
Not at all. And, a lot of the focus has been on the tech space. Take a look at what happened on Friday today at the closing bell. We see the S&P 500 down by about 0.4%. That tech-heavy NASDAQ 100 falling about 0.3% lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slipping more than 1%. And take a look at some of the action that happened in the small caps. Looking at the Russell 2000 there, down about 1.7%. But just as Joe was talking about, we've really been keeping an eye this month in February about the monthly scope. A lot of the performance has really been pressured by the idea of this AI scare. A lot of people nervous about what artificial intelligence could mean, not only for the tech industry, but whether or not it could phase out other industries relevant. So we do see the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100 and the Magnificent Seven stocks all plunging for their worst month since March of 2025. So we did see that in terms of February size and scope. But I wanted to dig into a software ETF, IGV on the ticker. Without some dip buying, we would have actually seen this ETF actually seeing its worst month since 2008. So that's since the global financial crisis. It really just shows you about all of the stress and everything that's been going on when we think about the tech space more broadly. I was looking at what Goldman strategists were saying. They talked about the halo effect, which essentially is investors going to other heavy assets, ones with low obsolescence like utilities, resources, and energy, all in search of a safe haven here, Joe.
I want to just mention a breaker. This just went red on the terminal, Nora, a story that we began our program talking about, and that is Anthropic. The president has already weighed in, of course, directing all federal agencies to unwind its relationship, to stop using Anthropic's AI hardware or software, I should say, with a 6-month deadline. Now this. The Pentagon has just declared Anthropic a supply chain risk. This was the threat that was hanging over the company that had been made by the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. This means that Anthropic will not be allowed to work with companies that work with the Pentagon. Essentially, they'll be treating Anthropic as if it is a threat, a company that cannot be trusted. And it is, of course, entwined with any number of massive defense contractors who were ordered this week to review their systems and gauge whether that unwinding would be possible. The Pentagon declaring Anthropic a supply chain risk with the breaking news on the terminal, and not a great way for this week to end for Anthropic. Nora Melinda, thank you, of course, for your read on the markets, and we'll have much more straight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Like seeing him deposed, but they certainly went after me a lot more than that. I like him, and I don't like seeing him deposed.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. That was President Trump, of course, on his way to Texas today discussing the deposition of former President Bill Clinton. He was asked about it. Both the former president and Hillary Clinton testified before the House Oversight panel this week over their ties to Jeffrey Epstein. The panel grilled Clinton on topics including flights that he took on Epstein's private plane and visits Epstein made to the White House during his presidency. Joining us now with his reaction to all of this and a lot more, Doug Sosnik, the former political director for President Bill Clinton during his second term, Democratic strategist. Doug, it's great to see you. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. If Donald Trump is upset about this, that would suggest to me that it's going to impact more than Bill Clinton. What kind of precedent did we just set for former presidents of the United States?
Well, we did set a precedent for the first time in history. President has testified under threat by Congress.
Yeah.
And I think what Donald Trump obviously understands is we've set a precedent. And while it may be difficult to bring Trump up to Congress as president, there's certainly no reason after he leaves office that he won't be called to testify.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we're looking at, right? This is going to be a reality for every former president now if the opposing party has a problem with them.
Well, that's right. I think we'll see. I mean, so far, this has been kind of a kangaroo court. It's all been politics. It's all been designed to embarrass, this week, the Clintons. But the question is whether or not they're actually going to be trying to be more even-handed and start calling Republicans like the Secretary of Commerce, who lied about his dealings with Epstein. And so there are some Republicans now indicating that they think that Secretary-elect should come to testify. So maybe this will be the beginning of more of a bipartisan effort to get to the bottom of what happened.
Hillary Clinton said yesterday they ought to depose the president of the United States. Why aren't they talking to Donald Trump?
Well, she's right. I mean, first of all, they deposed her for, I think, 6 hours, and she said she never met Epstein.
Right.
Secondly, she's in the middle of this this closed-door session, and a member of Congress, Republican member of Congress, sends out by tweet to the right-wing media pictures of her. They go on to talk about, among other things, UFOs.
Yes.
But the nice thing about both yesterday and today is I suspect by the end of the weekend, the videotaped testimony of both Clintons will be made public. And so to the extent people are interested, they can watch the videos themselves and come to their own conclusions.
To think that UFOs and Pizzagate would both come up in that deposition gives us a bit of a sense of the direction of the discourse. Doug, I want to talk to you about more than just this. As someone who is so steeped in Democratic politics, I wonder where your head is on this midterm campaign. Having just heard the president's State of the Union, the argument over affordability, there are Democrats who think they can take 35, 40 House seats. How does this end in this cycle?
Well, first of all, I couldn't be happier than to change the subject away from the Clintons testifying. As a Democrat, I would say that on one hand, I'm extremely optimistic about the November elections. And on the other hand, I have some caution. The reason I'm optimistic is based on all historical precedents. Trump with the lowest favorability of any president, job approval at this point in their term. The direction of the country is overwhelmingly negative. Trump is not only has a negative job approval, but on every single issue, including immigration, but particularly all economic matters, he's completely underwater. Polling shows Democrats are much more enthusiastic about voting in November than the Republicans. And off-year elections are referendums on the incumbent party, and overwhelmingly through history, the party out of power does well. So that's why I'm optimistic. Why I'm not overly optimistic is we have made structural changes in American politics that really culminated with Trump's victory in 2016 in his first term, in which there are fewer and fewer competitive seats, which makes it much harder for Democrats to potentially reap the benefits that, by historical standards, look likely in November.
Yeah. I've only got a minute left, Doug. If I could ask you about what's happening in Texas with the primary on Tuesday. If you're running a Republican campaign, would you rather face Jasmine Crockett or James Talarico?
I'd probably rather face Crockett, and I think that the only reason, I was listening to your prior segment, the only reason that Trump didn't endorse anybody here, he wasn't sure who was going to win, and he didn't want to be backing a loser.
We'll see if that changes, I guess, in the case of a runoff. Doug Sosnik, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
Come back and see us again. Former political director for President Bill Clinton in his second term with us here on Balance of Power. Coming up, Netflix, another big one today, dropping out of the fight to buy Warner Brothers and clearing the way for Paramount to clinch its deal for the Hollywood studio. But what legal challenges lie ahead for this acquisition? We'll discuss with the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta. It's coming up next, an important conversation you'll only see and hear on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew at World Headquarters in New York. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us on the Friday edition. After a months-long battle for Warner Brothers, Paramount has officially outbid Netflix by agreeing to pay $111 billion for the Hollywood studio and paying Netflix for the $2.8 billion breakup fee to terminate its initial merger agreement just a short time ago. The merger raising concerns about market consolidation, of course, job losses. You've heard about it on Bloomberg. It's still pending regulatory approval, with Paramount Chief David Ellison already asked to testify before Congress next week as Democratic Senator Cory Booker announces a probe into the potential Paramount Warner Brothers merger. And Booker is not the only one, with California's Attorney General Rob Bonta warning Paramount's WBD takeover is not a done deal yet, vowing a vigorous investigation, and he's with us right now for more. Attorney General, is this deal not over? What are you looking at?
Not a done deal. The regulatory process still needs to be completed. There are hurdles there that have not been traversed yet by this proposed deal, and we have a job to do, and we're going to do it. We have an investigation. We're looking at the deal. We're looking at its potential anti-competitive impacts, and we know that corporate consolidation tends to increase prices, lower wages, lower competition, lower quality, and limit choice. So we're going to take a close look at that, as is our job, and make an independent assessment based on the law and the facts.
I suspect that's an investigation that could take some time. This is a massive and sprawling deal with a lot of properties. Attorney General, the critics say the problem with this deal, and those who favored the idea of Netflix buying it, is that this takes an entire movie studio off the table. Is that how you're looking at this, and what would that mean for California's economy?
Well, we are looking at that for sure. One of the first questions is, what is the appropriate market at issue? It's the market definition, and one is studio. You know, it will be a studio market consolidation. There's also a streaming service market consolidation here. So there's a couple of different markets at issue, and you know, California is the home of Hollywood with the fourth largest economy in the world. What could this merger, should it go through and be approved and get through the regulatory process, mean? It could mean less choices for consumers, higher prices for consumers, a less robust creative output and set of processes. It can mean fewer choices and lower quality. So there's a lot at stake here for the 40 million Californians. But these companies, they're so large, there's going to be impacts nationwide and worldwide as well. You know, it's of course not just studios, not just streaming services. It's also news, and you start talking about information on public areas in the case of CBS or otherwise on cable with CNN. Do you worry about consolidation in that business? Do you need promises that would not take place? I do worry about that. I think we all are worried about that and should be worried about that. We've seen what's happened to our independent, objective news that we so value, and we need to take steps to protect that. So that is an important area that we're looking at among the many other broader areas. And we haven't gotten ahead of ourselves as to what the potential remedy is, or conditions, or whether we think there's no way that there could be a set of conditions or remedies, or maybe we like it exactly the way it is. So we're not prejudging it, but we're looking closely, as we should, as is our duty and obligation. I want to move on to some other topics, but do you have a sense of how long it'll take before you make that determination? Because the two companies, Paramount and Warner Brothers, are moving so quickly, we're going to have to take some action, at least to maintain the status quo soon, if that's what we decide we need to do. And then we'll continue the ongoing investigative process and any other action to follow. But we can't let this get too far without some action. So you'll probably see something sooner than later. Like but weeks, don't have it exactly. Weeks, not months. Correct. Great. Attorney General, I want to ask you about tariffs. It was 1 week ago today, kind of hard to believe, that the Supreme Court ruled to strike down the president's tariff regime. He's, of course, taken some series of actions since then to try to reinstate across-the-board global tariffs. And he talked about this at his State of the Union address this week. Let's listen.
They're a little more complex, but they're actually probably better. Congressional action will not be necessary. It's already time-tested and approved. And as time goes by, I believe the tariffs paid for by foreign countries will, like in the past, substantially replace the modern-day system of income tax.
Of course, that was a loaded statement on its own. Attorney General, you called it a tremendous win, the way the Supreme Court ruled. But if the president is following up with 301 or some other mechanism to put more tariffs in place around the world, how does anything change? Well, let me first say I expected the U.S. Supreme Court to decide almost exactly the way they did, having been at the argument for the U.S. Supreme Court. The 6-3 decision of the majority, as well as the reasons. It was basically tracked the reasons we advanced in our briefing to the U.S. Supreme Court. Of course, Trump is absolutely dead set, even after suffering this embarrassing loss on his centerpiece economic policy, to continue to try to raise prices for Americans, unfortunately. And so our
role here is to see if his current tariffs are lawful or not. And we're looking with other states. We're concerned. They are global tariffs that he has imposed based on a statute for which it does not necessarily appear that he's met the requirements. There are requirements before you can impose those tariffs. There needs to be a balance of payments deficit. There's also limits about how high they can be, the tariffs themselves, and how long their duration can last. So there are limits set by Congress. And right now we have some major red flags that have been raised around whether those requirements are being met here.
Well, I'll tell you, it's been pretty amazing. We're going to have to get some more lawyers, Attorney General. Since the ruling, more than 100 companies have filed new lawsuits to try to get refunds here. And I mean, these are some big names. You already knew about Costco. You had FedEx, Dyson, Dollar General, Bausch & Lomb, Brooks Brothers. This is quite the list. Knowing that the justices were silent on refunds, is this what we're going to do for the next 3 years?
I mean, it should be done quickly and expeditiously. Trump unlawfully raised costs for these companies, and these costs were passed on to Americans. They deserve a refund with interest, period, full stop.
With
he
interest.
should send it to them as soon as possible. And, you know, he shouldn't fight it in court. He was deemed to be wrong by the highest court in the land, a court where he appointed 3 justices. 2 of those justices were in the majority opinion against him because they're following the law and because he's done something so clearly unlawful. The authority he cited gave him no right to impose any tariffs. That authority never used the word tariffs in its statutory language, and it was never used in nearly its 50-year existence to impose tariffs before. So, yeah, he did something unlawfully. He did something wrong. He victimized these companies, Americans, by raising prices. He should make it right by providing restitution and refunds immediately.
Well, I'll tell you, we'd like to stay in touch with you on both of these issues. Come back and talk to us and you decide what to do with Warner Brothers. Attorney General Rob Bonta of California, we thank you for the insights. Now, we turn back to the standoff with Iran, with President Trump today telling reporters he is not happy with what's going on. And, quote, they should make a deal, unquote, still threatening military strikes that could happen at any moment. I talked this out today with Richard Haass, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, and how he's watching this situation unfold in the Middle East. Listen.
The real question is, what is it the United States is asking of Iran? What are we asking when it comes to their nuclear activities? Are we prepared to be serious about asking them to rein in their ballistic missile program, their support for proxies? You don't hear people talking much about protecting the internal opposition. So we just have to decide how ambitious we're going to be. Obviously, the more ambitious we decide to be in what we ask, the less likely we're going to get an agreement. That means we've got to use military force, presumably. Well, then you've got to ask yourself, what is military force likely to accomplish? What are the risks of using military force given how Iran could retaliate? So the fact that we're happy or unhappy with the Iranians, the first question is, what is it we are asking for, and how essentially, how serious are we about demanding it?
Well, as we often have seen with the administration, there's been an evolving sort of justification that began with protection of protesters. Remember, that was weeks ago. Donald Trump said on social media, help is on its way. And he actually took credit for Iran, for Tehran backing off threats to hang protesters. At the State of the Union, though, Richard Haass, he talked about more than 30,000 protesters being killed. I don't know if they think that we've abandoned them or what they think of the prospect of strikes, but now it seems to be about not acquiring a nuclear weapon. And then we add another log on the fire with ballistic missiles. Is this too much? As the president says, Tehran is not negotiating good faith. Is it too much for their negotiators to follow?
Well, again, if we ask Iran to give up every aspect of a nuclear program, their ballistic missiles and the rest, they're going to tell us to take a hike. And they believe that they can put pressure on us. In some ways, they may be bad. They may think they are better positioned to take a punch over time than we can deliver one. There's things they could do to raise the price of oil. Given how important affordability is in this country politically, they may be calculating that's not something this president really wants. So we're still at the stage, I think, yes, we're negotiating, but some of this is also pre-negotiating. It's bluffing. And I think, again, using a boxing analogy again, I think the two sides are still feeling each other out.
Okay, little rope-a-dope maybe, but I do wonder, with the prospect of talks being scheduled for next week, if that matters, based on the behavior you've seen by this administration.
Well, in the past, the United States, last spring, we used force even though talks were scheduled. So what could drive things forward is if the United States thinks that talks are hopeless, or that they see activities, as you suggested, possibly taking place where the Iranians are trying to move or hide some important technology. But at the moment, my guess is the president's still improvising. I don't think he's decided what the United States is going to ask for, much less what it's going to do if it doesn't get it.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get to. Richard Haass believes Donald Trump is improvising, which could be dangerous in its own right, but I guess this is the way he operates, right? We talked to Bob McNally, Richard, at Rapidan Energy, who's got a real sense of the potential fallout here when it comes to what Iran might do, whether it's a bloody nose strike or a much longer campaign. Here's what he said.
If Iran chose to make the Hormuz Strait unsafe, it could do so for weeks. It's sort of like back in April when the Houthis absorbed 52 days of pummeling by the U.S. military, and we did not stop them from making Bab el-Mandab unsafe. Iran has much better weaponry, better coastline than the Houthis. So I can almost see spikes and reversals here. And if it gets to a prolonged Hormuz disruption, well over $100 a barrel.
And of course, Iran knows this, Richard. How far do you think Iran would go to retaliate?
Look, Iran will go pretty far if it needs to in order to, one, preserve the regime, and two, again, they may calculate that an extended conflict where the price of oil goes up, that they're better positioned than we are to hang in there. Look, part of the administration problem is they've amassed all this force, but they haven't really thought it through. I call it an armada in search of a strategy. I really don't think we've thought through where we're going to go with this and not just what's a desirable outcome. We also have to think about what's an achievable outcome. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that.
And he had a lot more to add. You can find my full conversation with Richard Haass, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, online or on the terminal. Coming up, we're going to have more on the breaking news that hit us since we've taken air. The Pentagon declaring Anthropic a supply chain risk. They've gone there shortly after President Trump ordered government agencies to stop using the company's technology. This feud is escalating quickly tonight, and it could have lasting implications. We'll have much more in a moment on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. We return to our big breaking news this hour. The Pentagon now declaring Anthropic a supply chain risk. Defense Department Chief Pete Hegseth on X, writing effective immediately, no contractor, supplier, or partner that does business with the United States military may conduct any commercial activity with Anthropic. This decision is final. Quote. That development comes, of course, after government imposed a 5 p.m. deadline for Anthropic to comply with the Pentagon's demands. It came and went without a deal between the AI company and the administration, and the president posting on Truth Social that it is over. He wants agencies to stop working with this company, one he refers to as a woke company run by left-wing radicals. Back with us for more now, Bloomberg's Mike Shepard. We weren't sure we'd get a development this quickly, Mike, and I appreciate your coming back on. What does this mean for the future of Anthropic's business?
Well, for their broader commercial business, it's unclear. But the Pentagon order from Pete Hegseth, posted to X just a little while ago, made it sound fairly far-reaching. It ordered any contractor that does business with the U.S. government, with the Pentagon, to halt any commercial activity with Anthropic, citing it as a supply chain risk. And that is a pretty drastic designation. Analysts we've spoken to, including Gregory Allen on this program earlier this week, said that you save those kinds of listings for companies that are found to be doing business with adversaries like Russia or China. So this is an aggressive step against a company that has been a pioneer in artificial intelligence, which I don't need to remind you, Joe, is also a pillar of Trump's own economic agenda. Boy, really something here. Obviously, now I realize there's a phase-out period, at least based on what the president said, would be a 6-month phase-out for some agencies, including the Department of Defense. But if you're Boeing or Lockheed, Mike, what are you expected to do now? Well, what you are expected to do is look through your networks, look through your business relationships to see what exposure and use you have of Anthropic products. If you have Claude there, say for human resources, for accounting, or something else that you might be deploying it to make your life easier or more productive, you may be forced to stop using it and turn to something else instead. And of course, this also opens the door within the Pentagon and within the classified work for the broader national security apparatus for other companies like XAI, OpenAI, also to maybe enter into that space.
Remarkable development this hour, Mike. Thank you. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard live in Washington. As we turn to our panel now for their reaction, this evening's political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, a Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. It's great to see you both on a Friday. This has been quite a week. And Rick, considering the amount of work that you have done in and around the Pentagon, I'm wondering your thoughts here and if a new precedent has just been set.
Yeah, this is really troubling, I think, to think about the fact that the administration got a lot of plaudits by bringing Claude in, bringing Anthropic into the Defense Department, letting it take control of some of the less efficient intelligence gathering and communications and organization work. And everybody thought, wow, this is great. This is a great company that has an ethic attached to it that matches with the government's. This was a Trump decision, and now they've gone back on that decision, and there are a lot of people inside the Pentagon scratching their head, asking the same questions that you just asked, Mike, and that is, how are we supposed to take this offline now? I mean, you have combatant commanders in places all around the world who were using various products associated with Anthropic, and now they've got to take a step back without an obvious replacement. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm concerned that there are way too many people in Beijing and Moscow having a good time tonight because of this decision.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, it's been framed, Jeannie, largely as a moral and ethical standoff or quandary here. The president is making it, in his rhetoric, a decidedly political one. He writes, the United States of America will never allow a radical left woke company to dictate how our great military fights and wins wars. He goes on to say the left-wing nut jobs at Anthropic have made a disastrous mistake. Is this an important moment as the moral or ethical debate around AI turns to left and right?
It's incredibly important, and it's all the much more important because we're talking about the nation's national security. And what we have here is a company, the leading AI company in America, that, to Rick's point, the president brought in, rightly so. And now with inflammatory rhetoric, because they are not willing to cross or don't want to cross two red lines, which most thinking people believe are sound, which is one, they don't want their products to be used for mass domestic surveillance, and they don't want them to be used for the creation of autonomous weapons, that they are going to be, their business is going to be hurt this dramatically. They are going to be cut off. But more importantly, national security decisions for the United States are being made in this way. That should be an unsettling thought and a reality for all of us. This is not the way we make national security decisions in this country. And the president's Truth Social there with that kind of inflammatory rhetoric just encapsulates where we find ourselves at this moment.
Wait, there's a lot there to consider. Rick, is there a world in which they're both right? The Pentagon, of course, is not going to be told how it can and cannot use a certain technology if it means winning a war or securing the nation. And companies like Anthropic are not going to be forced to compromise their principles, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're seeing clearly into what this was really about, because basically you had the Defense Department and Anthropic saying exactly the same thing. Information I've gotten indicates that the devil was in the details in the contract. And if the contract wasn't clearly aligned with the laws of a country, as Jeannie just mentioned, Anthropic wasn't going to sign it. And so, look, every administration, regardless of the technology, has to abide by the laws of the land. And if Anthropic felt that it was going to be put in the position of violating any of those laws, then they're probably going to be the lucky ones in this contest. But at the end of the day, you're right. This is a moving target. This is going to change over time as the technology improves. And we're just seeing the first skirmish in the war on AI, especially as it used with military.
The first skirmish. Jeannie, one of our producers, actually asked Claude, the Anthropic AI model, are you a supply chain risk in the U.S.? Somebody had to do it. That's an interesting question, says Claude. This is real. No, I am not a supply chain risk in the traditional sense. Here's why. I'm software, not hardware. Claude says supply chain risks typically involve physical goods, manufacturing dependencies, or critical infrastructure. I'm an AI service running on servers. There's no widget or component that needs to be shipped. Does Claude need to get an update on supply chain?
Well, if we think of AI as reflective of the intelligence that's out there amongst the human population, then they have a defense there that maybe the president wants to reconsider.
You're going to be doing this in class at some point.
I'm going to be doing this in classes. We can't escape it.
Well, you're going to be doing left and right on AI, I guess, as well, now that this is such a political story. I want to ask you both about Texas so we can all think about this over the course of the weekend. Primary Tuesday, as we talked about it, 3 Republicans. Donald Trump is with all 3 of them right now without making an endorsement. Here's a taste of what we just heard in Texas. Corpus Christi, here he is.
We have a great Attorney General, Ken Paxton. Where's Ken? Hi, Ken. Hi, Ken. And we have a great Senator, John Cornyn. Hi, John. Thank you, John. They're in a little race together. You know that, right? A little bit of a race. It's going to be an interesting one, right? They're both great people, too.
Yeah. Hi, John. Hi, Ken. Not awkward. By the way, Wesley Hunt is in that race as well. Rick, what does that mean to be the incumbent? The senior senator from Texas, John Cornyn, he flew on Air Force One with Donald Trump, and he didn't get an endorsement?
Yeah, I think that Doug Sosnik, you interviewed a little while ago, had the right attitude, and that is he just doesn't want to pick the wrong guy. It's not that he wants a certain person to succeed. There's no question that the most electable is likely, based on the polls, John Cornyn. But he can't take the risk of being the president of the United States and picking the wrong horse. And so, yeah, it's awkward. It's strange. Honestly, I don't know why they targeted Texas for this trip. It doesn't make any sense to go in there the Friday before a primary on Tuesday. But at the end of the day, this administration throws a few curveballs. They're going to take credit for whoever wins ultimately, and they're going to campaign hard because they cannot afford to lose the Texas Senate seat.
Just 30 seconds, Jeannie. Who's the more formidable Democrat statewide, Jasmine Crockett or James Talarico?
I think it depends on who wins this runoff, if there is a runoff on the Republican side. And boy, is Donald Trump going to be kicking himself if it is Ken Paxton against Talarico and the Democrats for the first time in 1,000 years take Texas. Can you imagine?
Pretty amazing.
And it's possible. Is it doable? We'll have to say.
It's going to be very expensive.
Very
Maybe
expensive.
the most of all time. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Great conversation. Thank you both, and have a great weekend. We'll see you tomorrow morning on Bloomberg This Weekend, 7 a.m. right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.